A gift of sanctuary. A little boy, scion of a wealthy house, once went to the lakeshore with his parents on holiday. While the elders sipped wine in a cabin with their snooty fellows, the boy was left to play in the sand and mud. He was terribly sad at being so scorned and went searching for a friend. The boy did not have to search long. He found a wonderfully chatty duck in the reeds, who told him stories of places the boy could only dream of. Though he was quickly enchanted by the tales, the boy became melancholy that he would never see such a place with his own eyes. The duck laughed and told him that this was not so. They would build one together. The boy and the duck waded out to a small island on the lake, and together they built a tiny house of sticks and sand. This sufficed for an hour, until the duck suggested that a house was not a fitting place for the boy. He deserved a palace. The mortar of mud would not be enough, but one of the adults might help. The boy went back to the cabin and found a noble who had stepped outside to relieve himself. So inebriated he was. He was easily coaxed into following the boy back to the island, where the duck leapt and tore out his throat to use blood and flesh for the mortar and bones for the beams. The boy was delighted, but the palace had to be bigger. Back he went, again and again, to collect the drunken folk to show them the magnificent palace. Again and again, the duck added their bits to the wondrous palace, whose spires and arches dried to become alabaster and gold. When the boy's parents came to collect him, he took them to see his magnificent palace out on the lake. They screamed and ran, leaving the boy alone with the duck. He was not sad. Together, they made merry on the island until the mists closed in around it and spirited it away to a land of cheer and mirth for all time. "101 Uses for Troll Fat." Another day in Orsinium. Honestly, Clavel, if we don't return to Aradon soon, I may lose my mind. What shameless merchants operate out of this city? You'll never believe what one of these orc vendors tried to sell me. I was minding my own business, examining an assortment of roots and snowberries. They were all shriveled and rancid, by the way, when this toothless merchant shoved a bowl of fat in my face. A huge bowl of fat. Can you imagine? He claimed it was the fat from some legendary troll or some such nonsense. I asked him why anyone would buy such a thing, and his rheumy eyes just lit up. Would you like to know more about troll fat? I'm something of an expert now. Did you know that troll fat is the densest fat in Tamriel? Denser even than Horker fat. I bet you didn't. Apparently, it makes an excellent lubricant that's especially ideal for cold weather use. And we know all about cold weather here in Hrothgar, don't we? Armor looking a bit dull. Why not rub some of this repulsive fat on it? I hear that no polish in all of Tamriel does a better job than troll fat. It can be used in poultices and various potions. It can be rubbed on windowsills to keep out vermin. It can be dried and eaten as a kind of disgusting jerky. It can be boiled to make a particularly strong glue. It can even cure vampirisms. Who knew? When he started talking about the many uses for troll fat in the bedroom, I had to take my leave. He also mentioned that it could be used to talk to Malakath. That was at least a little interesting. Apparently, if you rub troll fat on an idol of Malakath, it allows you to talk to the prince himself. I may have to try this. I'd love to ask him why his little green children peddle such atrocious wares. I'm giving this place another week. If I'm offered one more wedge of Echidair cheese or a stewed mammoth stomach, I'm on the next ship back to Volkelgard, with or without you. A culinary adventure. At last, I've reached the verdant swamps of Black Marsh. I've always yearned for an opportunity to sample authentic Argonian cuisine. This new Marsh King has finally made it possible. I've decided to begin with a regional delicacy, slugs. Like all good Argonian fare, slugs are frequently served raw and often with a sprig of salt. Meadowleaf. I was only able to sample 3 types during this visit. My chef's accent was very thick, but I believe the limited fare had something to do with the season. I've learned that swamp seasons change as quickly as the wind, so there may well be a whole new array to choose from in a few days. I can only hope that they are as flavorful as what I sampled today. Bearded blue. This indigo beauty is quite common in the bogs surrounding Mistmire Glade. It's roughly the size of a Nord's thumb and features a shaggy clump of tentacles beneath its long eye stalks. The slug features a subtle aroma, but it also has refreshingly citrusy undertones. The extra tentacles give the bearded blue a unique texture that can be a little distracting, particularly when consumed alive. But it tastes simply divine. The flavor is earth, driven with subdued, loamy notes, hidden below a firm citrusy bite. I was most struck by the crisp finish. Quite a treat. Black, banded slider. The black banded slider is something of a local staple. It is often smoked and eaten on a bed of weevil larvae and orange grass. But I insisted on tasting it raw. The slug excretes an acrid black oil when disturbed, but it was easily wiped away to reveal a long body with a series of broad black stripes across a pale, creamy mantle. Even washed, the black banded slider presents a chewy, tannic flavor that must be endured to reach the clean and nuanced aftertaste that the Argonians seem to relish. It's a mellow, almost floral flourish to an otherwise imposing meal, King Yellow. I was delighted to hear that the King Yellow was in season. This is a truly massive creature, roughly as long as my forearm and covered in a vast forest of fleshy, undulating bristles. It's always difficult to tell with Argonians, but I think that my chef was very surprised to hear my request for one served raw. He placed the beast in front of me, wrapped in a waso nut leaf with an indigo lily garnish. I was immediately struck by the rich bouquet of mossy, herbaceous scents. You can practically smell all of black marsh in the creature's mucus excretions. Each bite brought on a new wave of astonishing flavor. The brooding, nutty tang of the tail meat eventually gave way to the thick, oily bitters of the mantle. At last, I reached the head. I'm hard-pressed to think of a more alarming eruption of flavor. A cloying, buttery taste that swings wildly toward a dry, mustardy finish. Spectacular. I left the table with a heavy heart, knowing that I will likely not be able to taste the King Yellow again for another season. But I'm buoyed by the knowledge that tomorrow will bring a grand, new culinary adventure. This time, beetle larvae. I can hardly wait. A brief history of Old Sotha. To follow Sotha, still is to listen to the winding of the gears, to think of the unlimited possibilities of what can be, not simply what is or what was. I know this, but so too, do I know what truths our past may hold. My devotion to the Father of Mysteries has been unyielding, spring-loaded. I've even been told, but for so long, incomplete. I began to ask questions and was surprised so few knew. Where did our Lord come from? I received a name, but not an answer. Old Sotha. I was quick to find my own answers, not within the cautious words of others, but in the honest pages of books. My first discovery is that all information I would find was of the Old Sotha that was, for the town, was destroyed long ago. It was the homestead of the minor house, Sotha, and how strange to write the word minor with any regard to my Lord's name. But from all my research, I can only conclude such, as they are known for no great deeds or any particular skill. an unremarkable town belonging to an unremarkable family. Yet somehow, the birthplace of the very father of mysteries. Old Sotha was destroyed sometime within the First Era by the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon. There's very little speculation as to why the Prince of Destruction wished to eradicate this town, and I don't believe there needs to be. Why try to piece together the reasoning behind a being of chaos? The result is still the same, and that is the death of everyone living within Alt Sotha. Everyone, that is, but Lord Sate, rescued by Lord Vivek before either of them had obtained true godhood. Vivek's rescue is worth further insight, however. How did Lord Set survive through the attack? There is no mention of a battle, and from what I have analyzed, I can only assume that it was after Dagon's destruction that our Lord Set was rescued. I can only speculate in that end. If the tribunal wished for others to know, they would have shared the tale, and you certainly won't see me tugging at one of their sleeves, asking such trivial questions. And once again, the end result is the same. Lord Set was rescued, raised by Lord Vivek, and eventually ascended to his rightful place as our clockwork god. Whatever manner he was saved by Dagon's wrath, it was the fate of the divine gears which move us for him to live and guide us to reclaim our lost heritage. Tamriel Final. A case for open borders. My fellow citizens, I was as worried as you were when I read Queen Erin's proclamation. Opening up our borders was not a decision to take lightly. I too feared the dire implications such an act would have on our beloved homeland. Would our cities be infested with fleas? Would our children be stolen from their beds at night? Fellow citizens, I assure you, I had just as many concerns about the safety of our proud Somerset as you. As a kin lord, I had the great privilege of voicing these concerns to the very court of Somerset, and often found myself in the middle of the hotly debated topic. It was unprecedented. Madness of the wildest kind. I was determined to put a stop to the desecration of our beloved homeland. I too felt as though we were betraying our ancestors' wishes. Yes, my fellow citizens, I did adamantly oppose the very idea of opening our borders to these outsiders, cats and cannibals, that I knew to be unworthy. Then, something changed. I changed. Please, allow me to tell you why I now wholeheartedly support the Queen's decree. Allow me to plead the rights of those who are now our allies and neighbors. This change started with the stories I heard of the war effort. Of that, I am certain. A narrow victory, only assured by the archery support provided by the Wood Elves. Khajiite agents who learned decisive secrets through clever subterfuge. Even looking at simply the numbers of our forces, no matter our military expertise and strength, I knew it was impossible to fight this war alone. Still, I was adamant. Our tentative associates need only serve us on the front line. What need had we for them here in Somerset? I was set in my ways, and I felt that nothing could sway me. It was only when the unimaginable happened that I saw the truth. Andimiral, my shining star and only son, fell upon the battlefield. How often I think back to the night he left. If only perhaps I had been less stubborn. If only I hadn't bitten my tongue out of spite. If only I could have found the right words to convince him to stay. He was young and foolhardy, and far braver than I have ever been. The very thought that I'll never see his face again still tightens my chest so painfully. I can barely breathe. I did not learn of my son's death through courier or friend. No, I found out when a young wood elf stood before me, boots caked in mud and eyes filled with tears. In her hands was a plain metal box, and I knew before she even spoke that my son's ashes were inside it. Her name was Greneth. He never asked me to do this, she said as her tears began to fall. In fact, he always said he was never coming back. But I just couldn't bear the thought, He deserved to come home. Before that day, I had never even spoken to a member of another race. Never looked into the eyes of those who I had always believed were so much lower than myself. It was then that I could no longer deny what was happening. That day, my eyes were finally open to the truth, not through debate or decree, but simply from that shared sorrow I felt with Greneth. So painful it had to be real. The allies who we think so little of are dying with our sons and daughters every day. They share meals, exchange stories, try to find laughter and comfort when they can. They fight side by side, entrusting each other with their lives. This is the reality of their daily battle, far from our tranquil shores. Greneth told me about the last weeks of Indimeral's life. Perhaps it was only to comfort a grieving old Mir, but she had nothing but admiration for my son. Her words of his bravery and kindness gave me a solemn comfort. My son died standing up for the ideals he believed in. To me, a letter from our queen herself would not have honored Indimeral more than the kind words of his fellow soldier. How selfish the thought is even now, but this comfort would not have been possible without our open borders. The honor that Greneth showed to my family would never have happened. She would have been treated just as I always believed her kind should be treated, as inferior, as unworthy. Without her, Indimeral would never have found his way back home, but rather remained as an unknown corpse on some distant battlefield. I would never have gotten the honor of putting my son to rest. My fellow citizens, these other races deserve nothing but our respect. If my personal story in no way moves you, please, I implore you to speak to them. Buy them a drink at your local tavern. Invite them into your home for a meal. As a culture of scholars, we must open our minds and learn. Do so, and I assure you, you'll find cultures that are vastly different, often shockingly so, but just as rich as our own. Don't close your minds as we once sealed our borders. Our future depends on the ability to move forward. Take that first step with me, my fellow citizens. Soon, you'll find yourself walking toward tomorrow. A betrayal of our here. What says Yusuf, the stringent red dervish of Rihad? A daughter of the house of Akos Kasaz shall not marry an infidel of another house. Long have we followed the words of Yusuf, and yet now, what do we see? Right here in Bergama, a daughter of a respected crown family. That is to say, one who honors the traditions we brought from lost and lamented Akos Kasaz, Yath, and Kanish. Is this to be countenanced? Is she to be allowed to bear children of tainted blood? Will they be taught to turn their backs on Rupga, Tuwaka, and Satakal, and mouth false prayers to Arkay and Akatosh? I say, we must raise our voices and cry, no. Our ancestors came into the deep desert to found Bergama so that we could preserve our heritage from pollution by Tamrielic practices. The sanctity of Yokudan culture is our sacred trust. For 2,000 years, we have preserved it in the purifying aridity of the Alikar. Have we maintained our traditions for so many generations, only to see them diluted and disrespected before our very eyes? It is said that the magistrate is willing to license this ill-advised marriage, despite all precedent. What, we must ask, has induced her to make such a decision? Should a magistrate with such poor judgment remain a magistrate? Gather, O my neighbors, for we have weighty decisions to make. A cure for lycanthropy. The cure is finally within my grasp. An end to lycanthropy, once and for all. For over a decade, I have devoted myself to this very research. And now that I've finally found my answer, I'm told no. I realize Commander Adet's concerns are not unfounded, and I cannot deny the risks of such a venture. To even find a werewolf transformed by Hircine would be a tremendous task, and then to capture the creature. There's absolutely no guarantee that the Silver Dawn would be capable of such a feat. Even still, should we not even try? When I think of all of the good that can be accomplished, should my research bear fruit? Is this not our very purpose as an order? To completely eradicate the lycanthrope threat? I must convince Commander Adet to agree to this research. I must. It seems the divines have smiled upon me. Though it's only been a few short months since I've made inquiries, I've just received word of a werewolf named Vykosa hiding somewhere within Malabal Tor. Rumor has it that she is a first turned, changed into a beast by Hircine himself. My records seem to only collaborate on this, as I found records which mention her name that date centuries back. This may be just the opportunity I've been looking for. Unfortunately, Commander Adet still stands in my way. Her word is law within this keep, and every mention of my research only seems to fill her with a stronger resolve to deny me. But I can't give up hope. Not now. Not when so much is at stake. I simply must persuade the commander, no matter the cost. And I believe I have just the thing to bring her to my side. Commander Adet has finally agreed to the capture of Vykosa. Unsurprising, given that her own husband has now been cursed with lycanthropy, a transformation courtesy of one of the many blood samples at my disposal. Put forth the idea of curing masses, and the commander balked at the dangers. But when it's her loved one in need of such a cure, she crumbled right before my eyes. Pathetic. Now I must simply set a trap for Vykosa. No easy task, of course, but one that I'm confident a man of my intellect can pull off. Victory is almost at hand. One way or another, I will create this cure. By the 8, I must. Baron Admiral Bindu Olo. Bindu Olo, the Colovian king of Anvil, devised a bold plan for ending the threat posed by the Sload of Thraz once and for all. He proposed the creation of a vast fleet made up of ships from every nation. He further proposed that he would step away from his royal duties to personally assemble and command the fleet, which he planned to use to take the battle directly to the Sload. While the exact evidence that convinced Bindu Olo and other leaders that the Sload were responsible for the plague was never made public, it was clear by 2230 or so that most of the continent believed in the Sload's guilt, and the disease had become known as the Thracian Plague. In 2241, the Alessian emperor named Scratched Out finally agreed to fund the effort and commanded Bindu Olo to get started. Olo began by awarding himself the rank of Baron. Admiral then went about gathering the captains who would help him refine his plans and strategies, as well as the shipwrights needed to build the vast fleet he envisioned for the enterprise. It wasn't long before an island in the Sisters Archipelago was selected as the staging ground for what Olo was now calling his all-flags navy. In 2243, Olo and his entourage landed on the island of High Isle and began constructing the dry docks and infrastructure needed to build the fleet and launch it when the time was right. A guide to Dwemer megastructures. While we know a great deal about the various forms of Dwemer animalculae, many of the larger Dwemer marvels remain a mystery. Legends of Dwemer orreries and fabrication chambers abound, but direct, first-hand scholarship remains scant. I have spent my life in search of these dwarven megastructures. While I've met with considerable success, there is one mechanism in particular that I am keen to find: the Dwemer tonal resonator. At the height of their power, the Dwemer exhibited near total mastery of tonal forces. Even now, countless centuries later, they remain peerless in this respect. Sound, not magic, facilitated their rise to power. I am continually astounded by tonal force's wide range of uses. The Dwemer used sound in mining, medicine, architecture, even psychology. It's the latter use that I find most intriguing. According to ancient Chimerae scholarship, the Dwemer could employ tonal forces to bend weaker minds to their will, a form of complex oral hypnosis. Luckily, the dwarves never managed to mobilize this technology on the battlefield against our august ancestors. The scale and complexity of the devices likely made transportation nearly impossible. But they still managed to employ it on a limited scale using massive devices called tonal resonators. If the legends are true, these resonators were incredibly complex, architectural wonders. They stood taller than the most imposing giants and filled cavernous chambers with pipes, dials, and pistons. When enabled, the resonators released a series of powerful tones that could alter the brainwaves of lesser and men, inducing deep calm and profound pleasure, or even paranoia and terror. The uses for such a device are virtually limitless. Alas, I fear that I will never see one with my own eyes. If such a power could be replicated and perfected, the children of the tribunal could very well reign supreme in Tamriel and continents beyond. A children's Anwad. The first ones were brothers, Anu and Padme. They came into the void, and time began. As Anu and Padme wandered the void, the interplay of light and darkness created Nier. Both Anu and Padme were amazed and delighted with her appearance, but she loved Anu, and Padme retreated from them in bitterness. Nier became pregnant, but before she gave birth, Padme returned, professing his love for Nier. She told him that she loved only Anu, and Padme beat her in rage. Anu returned, fought Padme, and cast him outside time. Nier gave birth to creation, but died from her injuries soon after. Anu, grieving, hid himself in the sun and slept. Meanwhile, life sprang up on the 12 worlds of creation and flourished. After many ages, Padme was able to return to time. He saw creation and hated it. He swung his sword, shattering the 12 worlds in their alignment. Anu awoke and fought Padme again. The long and furious battle ended with Anu the victor. He cast aside the body of his brother, who he believed was dead, and attempted to save creation by forming the remnants of the 12 worlds into one, Nirn, the world of Tamriel. As he was doing so, Padme struck him through the chest with one last blow. Anu grappled with his brother and pulled them both outside of time forever. The blood of Padme became the Daedra. The blood of Anu became the stars. The mingled blood of both became the Aedra, hence their capacity for good and evil, and their greater affinity for earthly affairs than the Daedra, who have no connection to creation. On the world of Nirn, all was chaos. The only survivors of the 12 worlds of creation were the El-Nofei and the Heist. The El-Nofei are the ancestors of Mir and men. The Hist are the trees of Argonia. Nirn originally was all land, with interspersed seas, but no oceans. A large fragment of the El-Nofei world landed on Nirn, relatively intact, and the El-Nofei living there were the ancestors of the Mir. These Elnafey fortified their borders from the chaos outside, hid their pocket of calm, and attempted to live on as before. Other Elnafey arrived on Nirn scattered amid the confused jumble of the shattered worlds, wandering and finding each other over the years. Eventually, the wandering Ehelnafi found the hidden land of old Ehelnafi and were amazed and joyful to find their kin living amid the splendor of ages past. The wandering El-No-Fey expected to be welcomed into the peaceful realm. But the old El-No-Fey looked on them as degenerates, fallen from their former glory. For whatever reason, war broke out and raged across the whole of Nirn. The old El-No-Fey retained their ancient power and knowledge, but the Wanderers were more numerous and toughened by their long struggle to survive on Narn. This war reshaped the face of Nirn, sinking much of the land beneath new oceans, and leaving the lands as we know them, Tamriel, Akavir, Atmara, and Yakuta. The old El-No-Fi realm, although ruined, became Tamriel. The remnants of the Wanderers were left divided on the other three continents. Over many years, the El-No-Fey of Tamriel became the Mir, Elves, the Dwemer, the Deep Ones, sometimes called Dwarves, the Chimer, the Changed Ones, who later became the Dunmer, the Dark or Cursed Ones, the Dark Elves, the Bosmer, the Green or Forest Ones, the Wood Elves, and the Altmer, the Elder or High Ones, the High Elves. On the other continents, the wandering El-Nafi became the Men, the Nords of Atmora, the Red Guards of Yakuta, and the Tassasi of Akavir. The Heist were bystanders in the El-Nafi War, but most of their realm was destroyed as the war passed over it. A small corner of it survived to become Black Marsh in Tamriel, but most of their realm was sunk beneath the sea. Eventually, men returned to Tamriel. The Nords were the first, colonizing the northern coast of Tamriel before recorded history, led by the legendary Ysgramor. The 13th of his line, King Harold, was the first to appear in written history, and so the mythic era ended. A culinary adventure. Makmaka has been hard at work the last few days. He's been preparing a meal that I didn't even know existed. How marvelous. His assistant told me that the locals call it a nagasi, which translates to something like snake roll, I think. Snake stalking would probably be more appropriate. The process begins by catching a waso hedge snake. Apparently, Makmaka only trusts one local snake dealer, a sharp-faced hunter named Paxit. In talking to Paxit, I found out that picking a reputable snake dealer is of paramount importance when preparing nagasi. You see, the waso hedge snake looks almost exactly like the red hoop tree. Viper. Eating the former will give you a full belly. Eating the latter will kill you before you leave the table. I was delighted to hear this story. Dangerous food is something of an obsession for me. Once the chef has acquired a snake, he or she goes to work disemboweling it. The snake's interior is used in a number of other dishes, but nagasi only requires the skin. The empty skin is packed with a mix of wild marsh rice, dried parsnips, sliced bark, ear mushrooms, and a live mouse. Paxit explained to me that nagasi is a unique dish that always changes. Those who choose to eat the dish when it is first prepared are treated to the fresh vegetable medley and the lean, wriggling meat of the mouse. But those who choose to let the dish rest for a few hours or even days are richly rewarded for their patience. The longer the dish rests, the fatter the mouse becomes. It can spend a great deal of time feasting on the rice and parsnips before finally expiring. An average nagasi takes about 5 days to ripen. Hearing all this, I couldn't wait to get my hands on one. I selected a roll that had been resting for the better part of 2 days. I still heard a faint squeaking from beneath the skin. I think I'll wait a bit longer before I take my first bite. A guide to liturgical vestments. An ordinator's every action must reflect the divinity of the tribunal. Every thought, word, and gesture, no matter how trivial, must glorify the three. Our appearance, too, must bring honor to Amsivi. Herein you shall find a guide to liturgical vestment. At the beginning of the vesting, an ordinator must wash herself thoroughly, using mineral water from one of Red Mountain's sacred hot springs and a volcanic pumice. This act has profound spiritual significance. In washing the body, the ordinator also washes the soul, removing residual sin and any nagging doubts that might interfere with the merciless application of tribunal law. Once the washing is complete, the proper vesting can begin. The ordinator begins with the Wraithith triangular linen small clothes, dyed a deep blue and fastened with brass pins. The Rathith is further secured by the Arnith. The golden underbelt, which is also secured using brass pins. Daughters of Amsivi are also permitted to wear the Alrathith, a second garment tailored to support the breasts. With the Rathith and Alrathith secured, the ordinator is free to move on to the Lananor, or second garment. This long shirt must be washed in sacred mineral water before the sun rises and pressed thrice over a hot stone. When donning the Lananor, the ordinator must also recite the litany of 3 virtues. If the ordinator completes the litany before the shirt is fully donned, they are obliged to repeat the litany twice more before moving on to the next step of the vesting. The ordinator's pants, or philosophony, must also be washed and thrice pressed before wearing. Ordinators should put on these trousers, starting with the left foot, and must fasten them using a blue rope-like belt called a nozo. The slippers must likewise be worn starting with the left foot and laced with gold ribbon. Finally, the ordinator must drape a crimson wool stole, or duelso, about the neck and shoulders thrice, and fasten it with a triangular golden reliquary clasp. A neleviso. This ends the first vesting, or Alanathrelani, and prepares the ordinator for armor suiting. Before the holy armor can be donned, the ordinator must recite the 46 canticles of supplication and appeal to Saint Nerevar, the captain, patron of warriors and defender of Dunmaree society, for protection. After receiving Nerevar's blessing, the ordinator begins armor inspection. The armor of triune faith must be free of any nicks, dents, stains, corrosion, or other aesthetic imperfections. Even minor blemishes are affronts to Amsivi's divine persons. Ordinators found wearing imperfect armor shall be subject to severe sanction. The polish should be thorough and uniform, but not garish. The chitinous undervest must be rubbed with an oiled cloth and flexed to prevent aging and distress. Furthermore, the ordinator should oil all joints and treat all leather with a firm brushing and a liberal application of Quamawax armor dressing. At this point, the ordinator should signal an initiate to prepare for armor fitting. The initiate begins with the sabatons and graves, starting with the left, while reciting a prayer to Saint Realms, patron of pilgrims. Once this devotional is complete, the initiate proceeds to the cuisses, reciting another prayer to Saint Maris, patron of laborers. At this point, the ordinator must anoint the breastplate with sacred mineral oil and recite another prayer of supplication to Blessed Saint Nerevar before handing it over to the initiate. After fastening the cuirass, the initiate moves on to the riri braces and cowders, reciting another devotional to Saint Arlar, the penitent. After securing and lacing the pauldrons, the initiate should glove the ordinator, starting with the left gauntlet, all the while reciting a prayer to Saint Delin the Wise. Finally, the initiate must drape the blue prayer stole, or ritheles, over the warrior's shoulders, reciting a final prayer to Saint Felms the Bold. This accomplished, the assistant is permitted to retreat to the chapel for post-vesting prayer. Final armor preparations are left to the ordinator herself. Using the left hand, the ordinator must tuck a sprig of bitter green beneath her right pauldron. Using the right hand, the ordinator must trace the sign of the tribunal on her chest. gnashing her teeth and hissing thrice at each point of the triune to summon up the wrath of the tribunal. The tinder of faith thus kindled, the ordinator anoints the golden mask of devotion with mineral oil, presses her forehead to the helm to likewise anoint herself, then dons the helm. Ordinators may now arm themselves with any weapon, so long as it is thoroughly cleaned and thrice blessed before use. At this point, any action of the ordinator is protected by divine mandate. So long as she wears the mask, the ordinator is considered a faultless hand of the three, and is authorized to commit any martial action deemed necessary to protect the true faith. Hands of Almalexia and other specialized members of the order may have additional vestments to wear, but any servant of the three thus vested is considered a full ordinator. A Free Argonians Manifesto. It is the right and duty of all sentient beings to be masters of their own fate, to live or die according to their own wishes. Slavery is a foul practice that takes this choice from those bound under its terrible yoke, transferring their decision, making capacity to the owner. This is neither fair nor right, and should be resisted as violently as possible, everywhere and at all times. Anyone who stands idly by and lets another be enslaved is no better than the one who cracks the whip. For generations, the Dark Elves enslaved my people, some suffering from hatching to grave under elven control. During this time, the Nords did nothing to help us. The so-called Pact has not redressed these past offenses. Instead, we've been told to be happy we are no longer slaves. We've been told recompense is out of the question, but even a gar will bite if kicked long enough. If the Pact will not help us get what we deserve for our generations of suffering, others will help us. The Varakun seek power for their master, but also grant power to those who serve them. Through their auspices, I will avenge those who died as slaves. I will raise their tormentors as my undead vassals, and they will serve me forever in death. A culinary adventure. I've been pestering Makmaka for days. While I've learned a tremendous amount about Argonian cuisine, there's still one dish I have not tried. The AOG Saka. Anytime I request it, Mak becomes agitated and serves me something else. I suppose his hesitancy is understandable. The AOG Saka is among the most dangerous meals in all of Tamriel. The meal actually consists of two dishes served simultaneously. The primary dish is a seared and delicately sliced AOG toad on a bed of caramelized figs and cinnamon grass. The second dish is a bowl of cold hash, a dark and viscous soup. Neither of these dishes can be consumed alone, as each is a deadly poison. Rather, they must be eaten slowly and simultaneously. One poison serves as the antidote to the other. Eating too much of the toad leads to violent tremors and mouth frothing, followed by death. Eating too much hash leads to searing intestinal pain and vomiting, followed by death. Not surprisingly, this dish is avoided by almost everyone, chef and customer alike, but my palate cannot be denied. I believe that Makmaka is at least considering my request. I've brought a small fortune in gold and signed a half-dozen bizarre snake skin documents, which I can only assume are waivers of some kind. I can practically taste the toad already. My culinary adventure is almost complete. I return this book to you, Malvin. Friend, I hope that you understand that your friend wanted the AOG. Saka. He demands I prepare it. I eventually did as he asked, but he did not eat it properly. Too much toad, not enough soup. Have a good life. We hope you come eat with us too, but not the AOG. Saka. A culinary adventure. Today, Makmaka took me on a tour of his impressive caterpillar farm. Of course, I use the term farm loosely. In actual fact, the farm is just a series of small reed enclosures that each house hundreds of caterpillars. I was shocked by the sheer variety. I saw long caterpillars, fat caterpillars, orange and purple striped caterpillars. I've never seen such diversity. I asked a few questions, but Makmaka's limited mastery of Cyrododic continues to be problematic. I've attempted to learn some Jill to bridge the language gap, but it is slow going to be sure. Still, he tries to help me along. I'm told that he thinks I'm hilarious. Of course, it's impossible to tell such things with Argonians. I asked if he ate the caterpillars, and he seemed amused by this. He simply shook his head and took me into a larger enclosure. When he ignited the lamp, the room burst into a spray of colors. Huge butterflies and moths erupted from the walls, dancing around the lamp in a cyclone of beating wings. He gestured at some of the larger specimens and spoke at length in Pig Cyrodilic. He encouraged me to grab a few before leaving the enclosure. Eating moths and butterflies is a challenging but rewarding culinary experience. Most outsiders who are brave enough to sample the local cuisine remove the wings before eating. Makmaka offered to remove them for me, but I refused. He said something to his assistant in Jill, and for a moment both seemed mildly amused. That probably means Makmaka said something fantastically funny. A few moments later, he served me 5 green slipper, tails in a traditional ajum, a woven tray with a netted lid. I set upon them with relish. A truly satisfying butterfly dish hinges on the delicate art of uhi'is, or wing folding. Argonian master chefs use their claws to bend and fold the wings into tiny but ornate edible sculptures. Unfortunately, local custom dictates that outsiders fold their own wings. I made my best effort to replicate the simplistic siege fold, but I wound up making quite a mess. Even so, the meal was delicious. Green slipper. Tails are perhaps the sweetest of the slipper. Tails species, tasting of honey. Grass with a sweet but chalky finish. Hopefully, I'm provided with many more opportunities to master butterfly cuisine. A grifter's apology. Ever put down a tidy sum on a sword, only to have the blade fly off as soon as you got it home and gave it a swing? Bet you were mad. You probably stormed back to the market to find the silver-tongued bastard who convinced you it was magical, only to find his stall vacant. I know this because you bought that weapon from someone just like me. That's right, I used to pass off the shoddiest merchandise I could get my hands on to folk like you. I'd buy apprentices' failures, find rusted heirlooms at the pawnbroker, and make a profit off people who didn't have much more than big dreams about becoming a hero. Those days are behind me. I've done wrong and want to make amends, so I'm going to arm you with a little knowledge. The best advice is to buy your weapon from a trusted smith. It may not look like much, but you don't need fancy. I passed off cartloads of giant 2, handers-on youths with starry eyes, but you'll want to start out with something reasonable, a simple, solid one-hander. A warrior's only as good as his weapon, and you won't learn anything with one that's going to fall apart. If you insist on visiting market stalls, your first goal is to get a weapon in hand. Never purchase anything without giving a nearby post a few good hacks with it. First, if the merchant won't let you handle it and keeps coming up with excuses, he's up to something. I got good at distracting customers with fancy moves or a sappy yarn. You'd be surprised how easy it is to con someone into a purchase with a tale about how the noble knight's poor widow is just having such a hard time getting by these days, and how, being such a kind-hearted trader, I'm going to take all the profits from his old sword to her anyway. Doing an honest deed for a sweet old lady who can't travel to the market on her own. Don't let this happen to you. Ignore the chatter. Get hold of the weapon and check it for signs of painted over rust. Examine the hilt or haft with care. Look for traces of adhesives where metal contacts other materials. Avoid flashy weapons studded with gems, since you probably can't tell real jewels from glass fakes. The best cons know just a little bit of illusion magic too. So be skeptical about supposed magical properties and make sure you examine the item for more than a few minutes. You should know enough now about what to look for in a good one. Hander, and I hope you won't fall for any of these tricks. I'm sorry to anyone I pulled them on in the past, and I wish you the best of luck out in the market and in your training. The All Flags Navy. The work underway on High Isle was conducted with as much secrecy as possible. In no way did Baron Admiral Bendu Olo want to tip their hand to the Slode. The first vessels assigned to the fleet came from existing navies and established patrols around High Isle to safeguard the island. Initially, the Slode ignored the activity around High Isle, but as the shipyards edged ever closer to completion, minor skirmishes began to spring up in the waters between Thrace and Sistras. The Slode never launched a massive initiative against the island, so it remains unclear as to whether they never recognized the threat or did not have the forces to strike at the island. The shipyards and docks were completed in 2249. A large fleet of ships from every Tamrielic nation were already on hand to defend the island, and these formed the basis of Olo's newly designated All Flags Navy. Just as they finished construction on the island facilities and infrastructure, the workers immediately turned their attention to building warships specifically to add to the fleet. The word went out far and wide, calling for volunteers to become sailors, marines, and captains to serve aboard the new vessels. Bendu Olo's dream of a powerful, united fleet to rain justice on the Slode was coming to fruition. A Guide to Fishing Tamriel. After a hard week of farming, or a long night of being nagged by your wife, there is nothing better than going out for a bit of a fish. Now just being alone in the wild, listening to the wind in the trees or the waves on the shore, is good enough for most men. Catching anything of worth is typically the furthest from their minds. And of course, that means their neighbors and wives think all they did was sleep in the forest. But true anglers always look to fill up their catch baskets with the largest fish, which can be used for the tastiest dishes. And to do that, you have to know what you are attempting to catch, where they are found, and what baits are best to use. Here is a list of common fish found throughout Tamriel. Slaughterfish and trout. These fish are found in the foulest waters possible: sewers, fetid swamps, and in pools near decomposing corpses. A favorite of city dwellers who don't want to leave the safety of their walls. These fish are drawn to crawlers and fish roe. Salmon and river betty. Fresh flowing rivers and streams are the home of these tasty fish. They bite best on baits of insects and small shad. Spaytail and silverside perch. Still, lakes with deep holes or overgrowth that let these fish stay out of the sun are the preferred locale for these fish. Guts from small frogs, gar, and chickens, as well as tiny ocean minnows, are the best bait for these. Dewfish and longfin. When you are by the sea, you should try your hand at catching these beauties. Using common garden worms and small chub will entice the largest of these fish. I hope that this helps you when you next decide to go out and fish, my son. At least this way, you will come home with a full catch, and no one will accuse you of wasting your day. Death of Morphotypical Entities. In my seminal work, Chaotic Creatia, I described the means by which those creatures known to us as Daedra manifest themselves upon the mortal plane. It is this mechanism that makes it impossible to ever truly kill a Daedra, because they simply return to the planes of oblivion and then project themselves back to the mundus once again. The implication is that there are, and always will be, bonds between these planes and our own. This begs the question, however, if you kill a Daedra within its respective plane of oblivion, is it then truly annihilated? What about if the Daedra is slain while within one of the Adric planes of existence? I am fortunate enough to have had the privilege of engaging several Daedra on this subject, and I can assure you that they are not forthcoming on this topic. What I have been able to glean, mostly by way of observing their reactions to my suggestions, is that Daedra do not often, nor do they appear to care to, travel to the planes of existence dominated by Adric influences. Realms such as the many varieties of Aetherius, Sovngarde being a prime example, do not appear suitable for the travel of Daedric creatures. I would hypothesize, based on this information, and from information gathered from other sources, that the Adric planes do not share the same energetic tie to the Daedric planes that they share to one another and to the mundus. Thus, it might be possible that a Daedric vestige slain in an Adric plane cannot return to its home plane, and thus is left dead or simply trapped for all eternity. The irony doesn't escape me that if this proves true, then a Daedra can only truly die after it enters heaven. Instrument of Vengeance. Between 1E22, 49 and 1E22, 59, the shipyards worked night and day to turn out the massive number of vessels needed to bolster the All-Flags Navy. By 2260, the Armada numbered some 130 ships of various sizes flying under the banners of the Argonians, Bretons, Colovians, Elves, Cagiat, Red Guards, and even freebooters and mercenaries. These same nations also sent thousands of sailors, marines, adventurers, and support personnel in perhaps the greatest allied action in Tamrielic history. The fleet was ready. It was time to unleash Tamriel's instrument of vengeance on the slope. With the powerful elf mage Siribane at his side, Baron Admiral Bendu Olo issued the order, and the allied armada sailed out of the High Isle port toward the coral kingdoms of Thras. From the Abyssinian Sea and into the Sea of Pearls, the fleet sailed, using enchanted lodestones to navigate and keep the numerous ships in formation and on course. When they reached